Good morning, everybody. How y'all doing? So, I've been kind of quiet the last couple of days. I brought in some of my videos from my other Facebook page. It's called Everything God. So, eventually, I am going to bring some more videos from that page. If you're interested, if you like to have Bible study, or if you like to hear just positive, inspirational, encouraging words. That's what that page is about. So just wanted to bring that up. So if you're seeing those videos, there will be more Bible studies in the future, hopefully, prayerfully, and I will try to live stream them. I'm trying to set that up now through that Facebook. So I'll share it just so if you're interested. Um, I've been kind of watching the news and reading as usual. And I try to find stories that can relate to what's happening in forensics. So the story that I found that's really relevant is a story about a little girl who was abducted and unalive, and it took decades to figure out who her killer was. The way they were able to find out who her killer was, it was through DNA, but they were not able to find a match. So police and law enforcement, they received some help from a student that knew about genealogy. I think this is a great case to review because right now there is a lot of discussion about the Idaho 4 case and what's happening with the touch DNA and how Brian Kohlberger's DNA was found on the sheet allegedly, and also how the process was that identified that through genealogy, building a family tree. In this case, it took some time, I believe it was about 18 months. Now, in Brian Kohlberger's case, now we have, a few years later, about 3 years later. But in his case, about 2 years, 3 years later, in his case, it was done much quicker. So that's something to consider. But I want to talk about it. I want to bring it because I want us to build knowledge in certain areas. So, of course, we know about DNA. We know how revolutionary it has been over the last few decades, how it has grown, expanded. And it's a great tool for law enforcement. So, I want to talk about that. I want us to get the knowledge. So, when we're hearing what's happening in the Idaho 4 case, with the prosecution of Brian Kohlberger, we have some basis, some foundation for what is going on. Why is it important? What is the need? Why should the prosecutor follow the protocol? What could happen if you don't follow the protocols? If you make certain steps that are not right, can you, in fact, select the wrong person, right? So all of that is being discussed because that's a big part. The prosecutor is saying they're not going to use that touch DNA evidence. But that is easy to say now because you already have identified a suspect and you've gathered supporting evidence and witnesses to support what you believe happened and by whom, right? So this is something that the defense is going to attack, is going to investigate, wants that evidence, wants to be able to build that family tree, and they want to know how all of this happened because it's relevant. It's relevant um, for the potential for mistakes and violations, right? Did the prosecutor or did the FBI or whatever agency, did they cross the line? Did they use services that they were not allowed to use? So all of that comes into play. Now, in this case, those are not the issues, but we can take this information, this foundational information, and apply it to future cases. And that's what I'm hoping to do. And I'm hoping to share this information so you can be thinking about these things when the trial is going, when motions are filed relating to the touch DNA in the Idaho 4 case. Um, I am going to make a separate video. I know that there's going to be some type of episode released about the Idaho 4, and there's going to be potential witnesses in that episode. Um, I want to have a video to discuss how are witnesses handled? How is evidence potentially not being um, developed, and you're not under oath when you're giving what is considered testimony, when you're talking about evidence, potential evidence, or information that you could be questioned on as a potential witness in the criminal proceedings, right? Because this episode about the Idaho 4 is coming out, my concern is what is going to happen to the jury, tainting it possibly, providing factual information. I know in some videos in the past, I really discussed, why it's important for law enforcement not to share information, to not reveal information, case known facts, information to the public, possibly telling family members or close people to the investigation about evidence, right? Because what's happening from the clip that I briefly saw, things that only the killer would know was revealed in the preview for that episode. And my concern is if you're potentially a witness and you're releasing details that would only be known to the killer and law enforcement or possible witnesses, that is really not a good act on behalf of that potential witness. And I have said it before that any discussion of factual information, such as what was released in the preview for the episode, that should be held for court. You do not hold court outside of court to try to push a narrative or provide the facts of the case to the public. For example, the main reason you don't do it is because if you have a potential suspect or you're searching for suspects or you believe multiple people are involved, when you release the details of the investigation, how do you examine or question or interrogate a potential suspect? You can have someone that you believe is a suspect, or you can have someone say they are the killer, for example. How do you examine them? How do you interrogate them with your main parts that no one would know but the killer, the law enforcement police, or the witnesses? How do you interrogate them if you're giving your whole case, the details, and releasing it to the public? It is not wise. It is not customary. And this is leakage that no one needs or wants. This can have an effect on how people perceive what has happened in this case. It has happened multiple times. I'm not sure if this was something that was taped, for example, 8 months ago, 6 months ago. I know the trial has been set to the side for both the prosecutor and the defense to continue to build their cases and prepare for trial, which will likely be in 2024, as I have been saying for months, recognizing the number of victims, the number of witnesses, the amount of evidence, and the need to have different evidence reviewed by experts. So, knowing that, recognizing that initially, October 2nd, neither the prosecution or the defense would have been prepared to proceed. They still have motions that are pending where evidence has to be shared, and I'm sure they're still investigating some aspects of the case, along with waiting for some of the evidence to return from the lab and maybe even some expert testimony that still has to be reviewed, notwithstanding prepping the witnesses and scheduling them. So this will give both sides time. But the point of all of what I'm saying is you do not want details to continue to come out prior to the trial. So something needs to happen. I'm not sure if the judge is going to make some type of determination or if the prosecutor or the defense will bring this up, but this is not typical. This does not happen in a normal criminal proceeding. You are not leaking out details that could prejudice a jury, that could also harm potential assailants if you do not have them all, or you may have the wrong suspect, right? So I'm going to do a video about the normal procedures for how witnesses are really prepped, tips on how they testify, just so we're aware that this is not normal. Potential witnesses do not do interviews. They do not give press conferences. They do not get involved in TV shows and things like that before trial. Now, after trial, that could be something that they endeavor in because people do want to speak to them. They want to know about their experience, things that they know, things that they said in court, and then those interviews would come. However, the trial has not happened, and this is really pressing for the details that law enforcement or police or leaks, someone close, other witnesses, the I don't know how else a person would know that unless they was either a witness, law enforcement, the prosecution, the defense, or the killer or killers, right? How would that person know how a potential crime scene appears, how the bodies are found, how the positioning and placement and the order of things? It's just not right and it needs to stop. So I'm going to do a video giving the information that will help witnesses when they're going to testify in court, how to do that properly, because this is not normal. This is not normal behavior at all. So just coming back to this case, the whole significance of me reviewing this particular case is because of the genealogy that was used to find the killer. It had been more than 50 years. The DNA they had, but they could not match it. And unbeknownst to law enforcement, the killer was deceased. Okay, so let's get started. The first article I'm going to read is from Oxygen True Crime. The title is Police Solve 1964 Rape and Murder of 9-year-old who vanished while carrying church gifts on the way to school. The article is dated February 9, 2022. The body of Marise Ann Chiverella was found in a coal-stripping pit about 2 miles away from her home. The Pennsylvania State Police have announced they've identified the man who unalived a 9-year-old child in 1964. So behind me, I have one of the news articles, and I have a black and white picture of Marise Ann. I'm going to post on the Hidden Horror Facebook page a reel of more pictures of her and other news clippings as well. Okay, after this. It's been 57 years since someone unalived and assaulted Marise Ann Chiverella on March 18, 1964, according to the Pennsylvania State Police. Now, thanks to monthly inquiries regarding a DNA profile developed in 2007, so that was more than 40 years later, the DNA remained on that clothing for more than 40 years. Authorities say they finally solved the case. Police told Oxygen.com they would reveal the suspect's identity during a live press conference at 10 a.m. on Thursday. Sources told the Republican Herald that the suspect was a lifelong resident of Hazleton, Pennsylvania, and lived just 6 blocks from where witnesses last saw the girl shortly before her death. So they believe this person lived in close proximity to Marise Ann. They also claim the suspect moved around frequently and was later charged with a violent assault against a woman who survived the attack. So remember, I've said to you guys in the past that most offenders, they do not stop. They have no way to control their urges. So typically, they will re-offend. In this information, in this case, they're saying when he did a different assault, the woman survived. So he may have tried to unalive her as well, but she did not pass. Marise was on her way to St. Joseph's School, less than half a mile from her home, when she disappeared, according to the Republican Herald. She was last seen alive at around 8:10 a.m. as she left earlier than usual to deliver canned goods to a nun ahead of a feast day, a Catholic observance before daily mass and class. Several neighbors invited Chiverella to warm up in their homes, but she was adamant about bringing the gifts to school, according to CBS affiliate WKBN. So it must have been pretty cold in March still. She's in Pennsylvania, so it's still a little chilly. So neighbors were offering to have her come in the house to warm up. But she was insistent she wanted to get to the school so she could turn those gifts in to the nun. A search began when Chiverella was marked as absent from school and failed to return home for lunch as she customarily had. So she never made it to school. They marked her absent. Typically, in her day, she would go home for lunch, but she didn't make it home for lunch. And that's when the concern started. She's out of her normal schedule, right? So now people are concerned. Where is she? What has happened to her? At around 1 p.m., the child's body was discovered about 2 miles away in a coal stripping pit. Now, remember what I've said in the past when I've talked about this subject. You only have a few hours, pretty much less than 6 hours. If the intention is to unalive the child, it typically will happen in less than 6 hours. And in Marise Ann's case, it was probably 4 to 5 hours. So we have to work really quickly to try to find the missing child. Do not delay, do not wait. Call law enforcement, call 911. Immediately start to search with the last known place that the child was, because there's such a small window to try to recover the child. And this is what we also saw when we reviewed the case of Naomi Jones. Her mother immediately began the search, immediately. And she ended up giving one of the missing person flyers to Naomi's killer. As well, in the other case that we talked about a few weeks ago, I believe her name was Maria, I can't remember right now. Her killer, who lived in close proximity in the apartments, he unalived her very quickly also. Her dad went to work about 10 a.m. And when he got off in the afternoon, when he came home, he was unalive. So there's usually less than 6 hours. So we have to move quick. If our kids are calling, if they're saying there's a concern, there's fear, respond, active, quickly. Try to send help, try to get there, call law enforcement, call a neighbor. If you can't make it, a sibling, a friend, a parent, somebody to act quickly, because it only takes a few seconds to abduct a child. It's so sad. A search began when Chiverella was marked as absent from school and failed to return home for lunch as she customarily had. At around 1 p.m., the child's body was discovered about 2 miles away in a coal stripping pit. An autopsy revealed Chiverella was hit on top of the head and once in the right temple, according to the Herald. Someone had bound the child's wrists and ankles with her own shoelaces and stuffed her scarf in her mouth. She was as assaulted. So this may have been an abduction where there was opportunity. Remember in the past when I talked about Megan and Megan's Law, and how when she was abducted by her neighbor that lived directly across the street from her family. And he waited and he waited, And when he had a small opportunity, he took it, right? They're saying when Marise Ann was abducted, he used the items that she had. So he took her shoes and removed her shoelaces, used her shoelaces to bind her wrists and ankles, to tie her up, because she's 9 years old. She's taller. She's probably smart because she's able to walk to and from school, which is about a half a mile away. He took the scarf and he stuffed it in her mouth, and that was probably so she would have muffled screams. So this appears to be a crime of opportunity. That means that he didn't come with his own rope to tie her up. More than likely, by him living fairly close, they said about 6 blocks from where people last saw her, he probably saw her before. But now, just like in Megan's case, there was a moment of opportunity where the child is left alone or is alone. And the reason I'm bringing this up, just like in my other case, and I want to get the name just so we can have some accuracy. Give me a moment, I'm getting her name now. I read so many cases, I work on so many cases, I can't remember quickly all of the names. I can see her face right now. This was Maria Gonzalez. Okay. This was the case of Maria Gonzalez. Reminds me of her case somewhat. And also Naomi Jones. Sometimes crime happens because the parent or the guardian or the person that would be providing the care, watching the child, has briefly left or has left the child. And that predator that's always paying attention, always watching, stalking, they're looking for their opportunity. That opportunity comes when they feel that it's less likely that they will be caught. So they look for opportunity when the child is alone, is left alone, or is in a vulnerable space where there is no adult supervision to intervene and protect the child. So in all these cases, in Megan's case, when she was outside and the neighbor quickly abducted her, took her across the street. In Naomi's case, the neighbor was frequenting regularly in the apartment complex where she lived. In Maria's case, she was at home in her bed and her dad went to work, and that left her vulnerable to the person that lives very close and is paying attention. And now, sadly, as I said this before, all of these cases, right? In Marise Ann's case, she was walking along, going to turn these items in to the nun at the school. This is very similar to what happened with Gretchen Harrington, right? Gretchen Harrington was walking along on her way to Bible study. And the pastor picked her up, abducted her, strangled her, assaulted her, and unalived her. Very similar. So I want you guys to know a lot of these offenders, this is not their first time. They may have not been caught, but that does not mean that they don't have other victims, right? In Naomi Jones' case, he had two other assault charges that he did, I believe, 10 or 15 years in prison for. In the pastor's case, it was revealed that he had been assaulting his daughter's friends when they would come over and spend the night. I want you guys to see a pattern, to bring all of these facts together. And it really comes down to making sure that your child has sufficient supervision. If you're not there, someone that can take control, that can protect, that can call law enforcement, that is not going to leave the child alone or vulnerable. Because it only takes a few seconds for an abduction to happen. And I've brought several cases on here, and there's unfortunately so many cases where this has happened, and the pattern is the same. Your child may be in a space where someone has zoned in on them as offender. They're aware of them. They've seen them, they've watched them. And the only thing that has prevented that abduction is the protection of a parent or an adult or someone that's watching them. Most of the time, this is a crime of opportunity. I want you guys to know that. So let's keep reading. Her official cause of death was strangulation. According to Lehigh Valley Live, the canned goods were found near her body, so she never made it to school. You're thinking of her all the time and what she went through, Chiverella's cousin Jeanette Vada told WKBN. I'm glad they found her body because she had a good burial. Chiverella was interned at the St. Joseph Slavic Roman Catholic Cemetery, where she's remained for the past 57 years. Trooper Anthony Petrosky, the public information officer for the Pennsylvania State Police, gave an overview of the investigation to Oxygen.com, stating the case was given special attention due to the nature of the crime. So what law enforcement is saying, due to the heinous nature of the crime, they attempted for years to solve the case and find her killer. And that's due to her age being 9 years old, due to the fact that she was abducted. She was bound, her wrists and legs, her ankles. She had her scarf stuffed in her mouth, and her body was dumped at this abandoned site. Okay. In 2007, our Pennsylvania State Police DNA lab developed a suspect profile from the killer's bodily fluids, which were found on Marise's clothing, the overview stated. Shortly thereafter, DNA profiles were developed for all the original suspects and submitted to our DNA lab. However, the sample yielded no results. Since 2007, the killer's DNA profile has been checked monthly against all new entries in our DNA database and had not produced a match, state police continued. So typically, when you can't find a match, when you're comparing it against known DNA matches, that kind of triggers law enforcement to think of a couple of different reasons why. One could be the person stopped offending. Well, we already know with us offenders, that's highly unlikely. They're going to continue. Eventually, they will get caught, and then they do prison time, and that's when their DNA goes into the system. So, with S offender, highly unlikely. So, the other option is that offender, her killer, is deceased. Now, with it happening 50 plus years ago, that means that he would have been much older. So it's probable. It's possible. Definitely probable, possible, right? Okay. In 2019, police released composites of the suspect and what he might look at age 25, 40, and 60 with the help of Parabon Snapshot. Parabon, excuse me, Parabon Nanolabs uses DNA to create a composite profile, identifying features such as skin type, eye and hair color, and sex, according to their website. So, what they did, they took his DNA, they were able to look at his DNA and make some generalizations of what his features would be, what his race would be, the tone of his skin, his eye color, his hair. They can see all of that through his DNA. So they took that and they actually tried to create a composite of what he would look like, still trying to find her killer. The police put a lot of work in on this case. The composite showed a fair-skinned male who likely had green or hazel eyes. Police interviewed hundreds of people and accumulated more than 4,600 pages of investigative material over the years, according to the Republican Herald. Sources told the daily newspaper that investigators collected DNA from the assailant's surviving relatives, which helped narrow in on a local suspect. On Tuesday, police said they finally had their suspect. Through an investigation, a suspect was developed and identified as the assailant of this brutal crime, solving the 57-year-old case. More information will be revealed at Thursday's press conference, police said. Okay, so that was just one video or one article. There's another article that I want to read. So let me get that. Give me 1 second. This article is appearing on people.com. It's dated April 22nd, 2022, and the title is How a College Student Cracked the 57-year-old Unsolved Murder of a 9-year-old Pennsylvania girl. So I've linked it on the page. You can follow along or you can read it later if you like. The incredible work of 18-year-old Eric Schubert helped bring long-awaited justice to Marise Chiverella's family. For 57 long years, the death of 9-year-old Marise Chiverella was one of the most notorious unsolved murders in Pennsylvania. The third grader had set off by herself on the 10-minute walk to St. Joseph Periacal School in blue-collar Hazleton at around 8 a.m. on March 18, 1964, without any of her four siblings because she wanted to get there early to deliver cans of pears and beets to Sister Josephine in honor of her teacher's feast day. At about 1 p.m., a man teaching his teenage nephew how to drive near an abandoned strip mine turned garbage dump noticed what they thought was a large doll lying on top of the refuge. It was Marise. Her hands were tied together with one of her shoelaces and her ankles with the other. She had been assaulted and strangled to death. Among those investigated by the Pennsylvania State Police were a priest who had been suspected in a murder in Bristol, Pennsylvania, as well as a local exhibitionist who committed suicide after he was asked to come in for a polygraph test. Over the decades, more than 250 members of the Pennsylvania State Police worked the Chiverella case, amassing over 4,700 pages in the police file, but they never came up with a single arrest. It seemed like everybody could have committed this crime. State Police Corporal Mark Barron tells people. There were a lot of messed up people back in the early 1960s. Marisa's parents, Carmen and Mary, died without knowing who had killed their jump rope loving, organ playing little girl who aspired to be a nun. She and I used to tease each other, but we had a special relationship between us, says Marisa's older brother, Ron. Little sister and I was the older brother. I used to get my back scratched, so she'd scratch my back, and then we would all take advantage of her on that one too. She used to bite her nails, but she would scratch our backs and so forth. She got to a point where she learned that she would be able to ask for a quarter or nickel back then for her time, but she did it out of love. After her passing, says Ron, the family was in a state of desperation. Ron vividly remembers the day after they found Marie back in 1964. The house was in chaos, he said. People screaming, crying, rolling around, literally on the floor. Some of the aunts because of the horror of it all. My mother was totally in shock. The family doctor was there administering some type of sedative to her. My father was like a zombie. It was horrible, even to just try and describe. Then, about 2 years ago, the Pennsylvania State Police decided to try to solve the case with the help of a kid. The kid was 18-year-old college freshman Eric Schubert, who did genealogical research as a hobby, mostly helping people draw their family trees, but also working with law enforcement to search for suspects. Schubert, who is now a junior history major at Elizabethtown College, about 80 miles from Hazleton, had read online in the local newspaper about the police's effort to find Marise's killer. So he reached out to offer his services. I just figured I'd send them an email and say, I'd love to help if I'm not stepping on any toes because I like to think I know what I'm doing, Schubert says. However, before he got to work with the state police, he had to be vetted first. Investigators set up a meeting at a coffee shop on campus. We went into that meeting, and Mr. Schubert came prepared like it was a job interview, says Barron, the lead investigator on the Chiverella case. He had pretty much a portfolio for us. Also making a big impression, his drink order. We offered to buy him a coffee. He said, Oh, I don't drink coffee. I'll take an apple juice, says Barron. We're like, this kid's going to drink apple juice here, and he wants to help us solve a homicide. Still, Barron says, after listening to what Schubert had to say, we walked away thinking the kid was on point. It re energized a lot of people and gave us new hope, and then it was full speed ahead, says Barron. He's calling my phone here in the office, and then later on, it was text messages and cell phone calls. But I would say emails multiple times a day. Once we brought him on board, he didn't stop. After spending as many as 20 hours a week for 18 months, 20 hours a week for 18 months, researching every possible lead, Schubert zeroed in on a local bartender named James Forte, who had a criminal record but was never considered a suspect. Forte died of natural causes in 1980 at age 38. So he lived about 16 years after unaliving Marise Ann. So that would have made him in 1964 about 22 years old. At 22 years old, he abducted, bound, tied shoelaces on her hands and ankles, stuffed her mouth with um, her own, I can't think of it, her scarf, that's assaulted her and strangled her. And she's 9 years old, and he's 22 approximately years old. awful, you guys. Awful. Gutsy. The Forte lead turned out to be compelling enough to convince a judge to approve the exhumation of his body. So that's where he's already deceased. He's in the ground in a grave, and they exhumed his body because they wanted to get a sample of his DNA to see if it was a match to the DNA that was on Marise Ann's clothing. A DNA sample removed from clothing Marise wore the day she died was a positive match to Forte's on February the 3rd. I think the odds of the DNA not being his were 1 in something septillion. So that's 24 zeros, Schubert said. After the confirmation, police held a press conference to announce that they closed the case. Schubert skipped 3 classes to attend the conference. We took Eric out for milkshakes that day, says Barron, 39. He was my partner in this investigation. He's top notch. I was the big brother, he adds about their dynamic. Schubert says that using genealogy to hunt for a killer is an enormous process of elimination. In this case, the state police had the killer's DNA uploaded into CODIS since 2007, but there were no matches to any felons in the databank. In 2019, the state police then uploaded the crime scene sample into a genealogy website, which spat out hundreds of possibilities. From there, Schubert would research possible relatives and then send them to Barron, who would then track them down and rule them out through DNA. He was good to give us information and a new route to go down every day, said Barron. He was giving me names and saying, hey, can you go ahead and look into see what you can find out about this person or that person? How he came up with the names that he came up with, I have no idea. The voodoo that Eric Schubert does is amazing. Hard work, it's not voodoo. Research, it's comparing. Barron says it also helped that the people they reached out to for information and to collect DNA samples were very cooperative. Nobody ever went ahead and said, I'm not helping you. Don't ever call me again. Everybody was willing to help. Schubert built about 50 complete family trees to find a connection to Hazleton. 50 family trees. That was hard work. Thank you so much, Schubert. He finally located a man who had immigrated from Italy to Hazleton in 1904, Forte's grandfather. Schubert then looked for descendants who had been in Hazleton area when Maurice was killed. Forte and his brother soon became prime suspects, but both were deceased. Fortunately, when the police tracked down the brother's wife, she had an old hairbrush from her husband, and a DNA test of it ruled him out, which left James Forte. I was just so relieved for the family, says Schubert. Ron says he is thankful to the state police and Schubert for solving his sister's decades old murder. There's an emptiness that's there that never going to change, he said. But now that we do know, that helped close that door, which is a blessing. Oh, Let me see if I can get the article up, the press conference. It's just a short 3-minute video.
We're here today to put information out. Okay? It's about a homicide case that occurred in 1964. On March 18th in 1964, Marise Ann Chiverella, who was 9 years old, left her residence. She never returned that day. Her residence was in Hazleton City. Later on the same day, she was discovered deceased in Hazel Township. Troop N Hazleton initiated a homicide investigation. Over the past 55 years, that investigation has not stopped. Okay, which is why we're here today. We have new technology at our advantage. We use that technology. Our goal is for you to help us. The Chiverella family and Pennsylvania State Police Hazleton, we want this information out there. We want to put this information out there. If anybody has anything, that can contact us so we can move forward with the investigation. It has not stopped. It's not going to stop. So I'm going to now introduce Lieutenant Bertosky, who's going to talk more in depth about the investigation.
Good morning. As Trooper Petrosky said, I'm Lieutenant Devin Bertosky, the Criminal Investigations Section Commander for Troop N Hazleton. Since taking over as the commander, I've reviewed this case, all its attachments in its entirety. And just recently, and why we're here, is in 2018, we submitted a DNA profile sample of the killer of Marise Chiverella to a company called Parabon. Parabon can create what they call a DNA phenotype, which is the result on our board over here, basically a facial product of your DNA profile. They base this off of DNA profiles that are known as to what their facial features are against our profile, which is unknown. 55 years ago today, Marise Chiverella lost her life walking to school. It's a unsolved case of a 9-year-old girl, and she was raped and murdered. And we truly have not stopped working on this case for 55 years. As the Pennsylvania State Police continue this case, this new DNA profiling has allowed us to come with some photos and phenotypes and attempt to identify the killer. We do know that she was last seen around 8-10 hours by, I believe, her cousin. I think it was her first cousin on 4th Street. She was on the north side sidewalk approaching Church Street, which is 309. That was about the last time she was seen. And yes, there were other kids going to school. There were people going to work. Maybe this will ring a bell for them. It'll have them come forward with somebody they saw or something and bring up some recollection. As far as her as a little girl, she was described as a quiet, very polite little girl. Wasn't very outgoing. Was with, I believe she was very fond of her mother from what I can read in the reports. So she was with her mom a lot, but a normal kid.
So I'll make sure I share that video on the page. So you have that to watch. That was before the student reached out and offered the help. Like she said in the article, it was about an 18-month process, building those family trees, trying to go from one suspect to the next suspect, providing that DNA, seeing that the DNA was a match to the DNA that was on Marise's clothing. And then they finally were able to put it all together when they were able to get the body exhumed from the two brothers. So both were deceased. The first one, he was not the killer. The other brother was the killer. And that was all through building the family tree through the genealogy research and trying to hone in on who could potentially be a suspect. Now, what that press conference included, they used the DNA that was known to try to build a picture of what the person would look like. And that's generalization. So hair color, eye color, race, things like that. And they took that information and they did an enhancement at the age of 25, 40, and 60, what this potential suspect, well, the killer, because they had the killer's DNA, what the killers might look like. They wanted to give some type of picture for the public to look at. So in this case, they really did a lot of hard work. I think the technology, using a genealogy, using someone that was very young, but they just had that, they had the knowledge, they had the skill set to do it with the experience, right? And bringing that together with the police and law enforcement to continue to investigate, to obtain, through asking for DNA samples to find and uncover the killer. So I think this is so wonderful. Wonderful for forensic and also wonderful for Marise Ann's family, her siblings. Unfortunately, both her parents passed away before they were able to find out who her killer is, because we need answers. You're never going to hear. There is no such thing as closure when a family member is killed like this. But there is life still, and you keep working and you keep fighting, and you get encouragement, you get inspiration, and you try to help others, right? And that's what we're all doing. John Bosch did it, Megan's family did it, Pam Jones' family is doing it. So many people, right, that are out here trying to make a difference because of this massive loss. Anaya Banger's family, Anaya's heart. So many great organizations have been formed and laws created to protect our children. So let's just have just a moment to remember Marise Ann. So we'll have a quiet moment just for her. You know, we want to lift her up in light, right? She was a crime victim. But through her passing, more technology, more forensics processing, more ways to try to uncover who did this heinous crime came about. So that is a good thing. That is why I brought the case to you today. So I hope you learned something. I thank you for the time you spent with me and listening to this case and thinking about, you know, how as offenders operating in ways that they try to get away with their crimes. And you know, we have to be vigilant, we have to be on alert, and we have to protect our children at all costs. So thank you again for watching this video. You can easily check out some of my other videos. And hopefully I will see you in a future video. So I want you to stay smart, stay savvy, stay on top of things, be well, and I'll catch you in a future video. Take care, friends. Be well. Okay? Have a great weekend. Bye. Bye, my friends.